You're driving home on a route you've taken 1,000 times, and suddenly you're pulling into your driveway with zero memory of the last 20 minutes. Your hands steered the wheel, your foot worked the pedals, your eyes saw the red lights, but you weren't there. It is a terrifyingly common sensation, the feeling of waking up in the middle of your own life to realize you've been operating on autopilot, missing conversations, forgetting pages you just read, and floating through days like a background character in your own movie. But here's the part most people miss. We are quick to label this as a medical defect, a lack of intelligence, or the result of a fried attention span caused by social media. That assumption sounds logical until you look closer at how human attention actually functions. The reality is far more unsettling. You aren't losing your mind. You are simply untrained in the art of occupying it. There is a specific Japanese martial concept that diagnoses this condition with brutal accuracy. It doesn't blame your phone, and it doesn't blame your brain chemistry. It points to a habit you formed in childhood, a habit of treating the present moment as a waiting room for the future. The concept is called Zanshin, and once you understand how it works, you realize a devastating truth. You are likely spending the vast majority of your life absent from your own existence. This isn't just about mindfulness or feeling calm. Historically, Zanshin wasn't developed for monks sitting in silent gardens. It was developed for samurai who lived in a state of perpetual danger. For them, a momentary lapse in presence, a single second of mentally drifting to the past or the future, didn't mean a missed text message. It meant death. To understand why you struggle to focus today, we have to look at the story of a man named Michael. Michael is a composite of many high performers I've encountered, a brilliant lawyer, Ivy League educated, loving father, and by all metrics, success. But Michael lived with a secret that is likely familiar to you. He was a ghost. He was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. During high-stakes meetings, his mind was planning dinner. During dinner, he was mentally rewriting emails. When he played with his children on the floor, he was stressing about deadlines 3 days away. His wife eventually told him the most painful thing a partner can say, "It's like you're never really here." And she was right. Michael was physically occupying space, but his consciousness was constantly time-traveling. He tried every modern solution available. He downloaded meditation apps with soothing voices telling him to visualize a stream. He used productivity timers. He installed distraction blockers on his laptop. He even tried anxiety medication. None of it worked for long. This is where the risk quietly increases. Michael was failing because he was treating the symptom, distraction, instead of the cause. The problem wasn't that his mind was jumping around. The problem was that he viewed tasks as things to get over with so he could get to the next thing. He had never learned the difference between being distracted and being absent. To fix this, we have to look at the sword. In Kendo, the modern Japanese martial art derived from swordsmanship, there is a teaching that confuses almost every beginner. Imagine you are in a duel. You strike your opponent perfectly. Point scored. The fight is over. If you immediately relax, drop your guard, and turn to the referee for validation, the point is canceled. You fail. Why? Because in a real battle, the fight isn't over just because you think you won. The opponent might rise for a final desperate lunge. A second attacker might emerge from the shadows. You might trip over an unseen route. Zanshin literally translates to lingering mind or remaining mind. It is the act of maintaining a relaxed, high-alert awareness even after the action is complete. Musashi, the legendary swordsman,
Shoto Saint wrote that the warrior's spirit does not cease at the moment of victory. It persists through the next moment and the next, without a gap. This is the definition of presence. No gaps. Your life doesn't have swords, but it has something equally dangerous to your quality of life, the fragmentation of your consciousness. When you finish a sentence, do you stay present for the other person's reaction, or does your mind immediately sprint to what you're going to say next? When you close your laptop, are you aware of the room you're sitting in, or are you already mentally driving to the gym? Michael discovered this concept by accident while watching a Kendo documentary for his son. The instructor on screen said, even after landing the strike, the posture remains, the attention remains. The moment isn't over just because you decide it is. That sentence hit him harder than any self-help book. He realized he had spent 35 years ending moments prematurely. He treated the present like a loading screen for the future. So he decided to run a brutal experiment in self-honesty. He wanted to know exactly how gone he really was. He carried a small pocket notebook with him for a single day. The rules were simple. Every time he woke up, every time he realized he was staring at a screen, a person, or a wall while his mind was completely elsewhere, he would make a tally mark. He expected to make maybe 10 or 15 marks. In the first hour, he made 8. By lunch, the page was getting crowded. By the time he went to bed, there were 47 marks. 47 times in a single 16-hour period, he caught himself being completely absent, and those were just the times he noticed. If you do the math, assuming each lapse lasted a few minutes, Michael was effectively missing for 30% to 40% of his day. He was living a partial life. The other 60% was spent in a hallucination of the past or a simulation of the future. When he showed the notebook to his wife, asked the only question that matters. So, what are you going to do about it? This is where the advice sounds right, but can still be dangerous if you don't understand the mechanism. Most people would say, focus harder. But you can't muscle your way into presence. It's not about tension, it's about retention. Harvard research into attention suggests that the human mind wanders about 47% of the time. Crucially, the study found that happiness is inversely related to mind wandering. The more your mind is elsewhere, the less happy you are, even if your mind is wandering to pleasant topics. We are built to function best when our internal narrative matches our external reality. Michael realized he couldn't just decide to be present. He needed training wheels. He couldn't hire a samurai master to follow him around and hit him with a stick every time he zoned out. So, he developed what he called return anchors. These weren't affirmations, they were physical tripwires. The first anchor was his office doorknob. The rule was non-negotiable. Every time his hand touched the cold metal of that specific handle, entering or leaving, he had to answer one question: where am I right now? Not philosophically, literally. On day 3, the effectiveness of this simple trigger scared him. He reached for the door after a chaotic meeting, his mind spinning with arguments and to-do lists. His hand touched the metal, the anchor fired. He stopped. Where am I? He realized he didn't know. His body was in the hallway, but his mind was 3 hours in the future. The shock of that disconnection forced him to take a breath. I am standing on the gray carpet. I can hear the hum of the server room. I am holding my laptop. It took 5 seconds, but for those 5 seconds, the ghost returned to the body. He was fully integrated. He added more anchors. The click of the seatbelt meant 3 conscious breaths before turning the key. The first bite of dinner meant putting the fork down and actually tasting the texture and temperature of the food. These were small islands of reality in an ocean of dissociation. And it started working. His wife noticed it first. During a Tuesday night dinner, she stopped mid-sentence. She looked at him with a puzzled expression and said, "You're really listening to me." It wasn't a compliment. It was an observation of an anomaly. Usually, she could see his eyes glazing over, scanning for an exit. Tonight, he was locked in. He was there. But this is where the story usually cuts to a happy montage, and that would be a lie. Because as Michael deepened his practice of Zanshin, he ran into a wall that no one warns you about. Your brain hates the present. Evolutionarily, your brain is a survival machine, not a happiness machine. In the wild, sitting around fully absorbed in the beauty of a sunset was a great way to get eaten by a predator. Your brain is wired to scan for threats, the future, and analyze past mistakes, history. When you force it to sit still in the now, it panics. By the 3rd week, Michael wasn't feeling zen. He was feeling agitated. When he tried to just be in a moment, without checking his phone, without planning his week, a wave of anxiety would wash over him. It was a physical itch. His mind would scream, "Do something, plan something, worry about something." He almost quit. He thought he was doing it wrong. He thought presence was supposed to feel like peace. This is the critical misunderstanding. Zanshin is not relaxation. It is alertness.
And sometimes reality is boring. Sometimes it is painful. Sometimes it is anxious. The samurai doesn't close his eyes and imagine a happy place. He stares at the opponent in front of him with total clarity. Michael learned that he had to build a tolerance for the raw texture of the present moment. He had to learn to feel the anxiety of doing nothing without reacting to it. He had to stand in the hallway, hand on the doorknob, feeling the urge to rush, and simply
watch the urge. He wasn't becoming a monk, he was becoming a scientist of his own experience. And as he pushed through this resistance, the external results began to manifest in ways that confused his colleagues. A coworker asked if he was on new medication because he seemed slower. Not stupid slow, but deliberate. He stopped interrupting people. He stopped making small, careless errors in his contracts. When you stop time traveling, you gain a massive amount of processing power. You aren't wasting energy simulating a conversation that hasn't happened yet. You are applying 100% of your intellect to the document in front of you. But the real test, the moment that proved Zanshin was more than just a productivity hack, came on the highway. Michael was driving his son to soccer practice. He was practicing his driving anchor, feeling the vibration of the steering wheel. Suddenly, a sedan in the left lane swerved into his path without signaling. In his old life, this would have triggered a cascade. He would have slammed on the brakes, screamed, and then spent the next 20 minutes raging. He would have replayed the scenario in his head a dozen times. What if we crashed? That idiot, I should have honked. He would have arrived at the soccer field, physically safe, but mentally wrecked. This time, the car swerved. Michael's body reacted instantly. Brakes, steer, stabilize. Zanshin. But then, the mental reaction happened. He watched the anger rise up like a wave. He saw the thought, that guy nearly killed us. And he just let it pass. He didn't grab onto the thought. He didn't invite it in for tea. He noted the danger, noted the safety, and returned his hands to the wheel. The adrenaline spike lasted 10 seconds. The mental recovery took 30 seconds. He didn't lose the next hour to a hypothetical accident. He looked at his son, asked him if he was okay, and continued driving. He had reclaimed an hour of his life from the void. He realized then that he was
training himself to never get distracted. That is impossible. He was training the return muscle. He was shortening the refractory period. In the beginning, if Michael got distracted, he was gone for hours. Now, he was gone for minutes. Soon, it would be seconds. This brings us to the most advanced and paradoxical phase of Zanshin, something the masters call Metsuke. It translates roughly to looking at the far mountain. It sounds abstract, but it is the practical secret to high-level performance in any field. Michael stumbled onto this when he realized that focusing didn't mean narrowing his vision to a pinprick. It meant the opposite. It meant widening the lens until the concept of distraction disappeared, because everything became part of the picture. In a high-pressure boardroom meeting, Michael decided to test this. Usually, he would lock his eyes on the speaker, straining to absorb every word, which paradoxically made his mind wander because the intensity was exhausting. This time, he relaxed his gaze. He employed Metsuke. He looked at the speaker, but he allowed his peripheral vision to open up. He saw the speaker, yes, but he also noticed the colleague to his left shifting uncomfortably in her chair. He noticed the senior partner at the end of the table checking his watch under the table. He felt the temperature of the room. He heard the hum of the projector. Here is the counterintuitive part. By not forcing his focus onto one single point, he didn't become scattered. He became unshakable. He was no longer fighting the environment to pay attention. He was inhabiting the environment. When the speaker finished, Michael responded not just to the words, but to the room. He addressed the unspoken tension he had observed. His boss looked at him with a surprise that bordered on suspicion. Michael wasn't just smarter in that moment. He was operating on a higher bandwidth than everyone else in the room. He realized this is why martial arts masters seem to
have eyes in the back of their heads. It's not magic, it's simply that they haven't collapsed their awareness into a tiny tunnel of anxiety. They are using the full capacity of their senses. Michael brought this home, and this is where the failed multitasker finally found peace. We've all been there, trying to cook dinner while half listening to a spouse and keeping one eye on the kids. We usually fail at all three, burning the garlic, missing the conversation, and snapping at the children. Michael stopped trying to switch rapidly between tasks. Instead, he expanded his container. He stood in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, and visualized his awareness expanding like a bubble to include the living room. He wasn't thinking about the kids. He was simply holding them in his peripheral awareness while he cut the onions. His wife walked in and started talking. Instead of stopping his hands or pretending to listen, he kept the rhythm of the knife, but let her voice become the primary focal point within that bubble. He wasn't dividing his attention. He was sharing his presence. She felt it immediately. "It feels like you're actually here," she said. And the tragedy of that statement is that it shouldn't be notable. It should be the baseline. But in a world of fragmented ghosts, actual presence feels like a superpower. 4 months after the initial notebook experiment, Michael decided to run the test again. He took the same battered notebook, turned to a fresh page, and spent 16 hours tracking his absence. He went through his morning routine, his commute, his high-stress workday, and his evening with the family. Every time he caught himself drifting into a fantasy about the future or a regret about the past, he made a mark. The first time, the number had been 47. This time, the number was 8. He wasn't perfect. Perfection is a myth that sells self-help books but destroys real progress. He still drifted, but the difference was the recovery time. In the
Past, a drift lasted 20 minutes. Now, it lasted seconds. He had rewired his brain not to prevent wandering, but to reject the comfort of the void. And this reveals the data point that changes everything. Michael didn't get smarter. His IQ didn't jump 10 points. He didn't learn speed reading. He simply removed the interference. He stopped living 70% of his life in a timeline that didn't exist, which liberated a massive amount of cognitive energy for the timeline that did. You feel stressed not because life is hard, but because you are constantly trying to be in 2 places at once, here physically and somewhere else mentally. The friction between those 2 states is what burns you out. When they align, even difficult tasks become manageable. But the true payoff of Zanshin wasn't at work. It happened on a Saturday morning at a community park. Michael was sitting on the bleachers watching his 8-year-old son play soccer. It was a scene you can see in any town in America. The stands were full of parents, but the attention was scarce. Look closely next time you're at a playground. You will see a row of adults physically facing the field, but their necks are bent at a 45-degree angle. They are scrolling. They are checking emails. They are recording the game on their phones to watch later, missing the actual game happening right in front of them. They are documenting a life they aren't living. Michael sat there, phone in his pocket, hands on his knees. He practiced his anchor, the sensation of the sun on his arms. He watched the game, not just the ball, but the flow, Metsuke. His son made a clumsy pass, tripped over the ball, and fell. It wasn't a highlight reel moment. It was nothing special. But as the boy scrambled up, he looked toward the bleachers. He didn't look for the camera. He looked for his father's eyes. And because Michael was practicing Zanshin, because he was fully, uncomfortably, beautifully present, he met that gaze instantly.
Smiled and gave a small nod. The boy beamed, a flash of pure connection, and ran back into the play. It lasted less than a second. If Michael had been checking a notification, he would have missed it. If he had been thinking about Monday's deposition, he would have looked right through it. And that is the terrifying realization that brought Michael to tears in the car ride home. How many of those moments had he missed? How many times had his wife looked for him, or his children reached out for him, only to find a mannequin occupying his seat? You cannot make up for lost time. That is the one lie we need to stop telling ourselves. You cannot make it up to the people you ignored for a decade. Those moments are gone, burned into the entropy of the universe. But you can stop wasting the time you have left. This is the brutal, beautiful promise of Zanshin. It offers you a way to stop the bleeding. It doesn't ask you to be a monk. It doesn't ask you to move to a mountain. It asks you to treat your attention with the same respect a samurai treats his sword, as a tool that cuts through the illusion of later and anchors you in now. So, let's be honest about where you are. You are not stupid. You do not have a broken brain.
You are simply a victim of a culture that has monetized your distraction and taught you that speed is the same thing as effectiveness. You have been trained to leave the room. Now, you must train yourself to stay. Zanshin is not a quick fix. It is a daily, lifelong rebellion against the urge to check out. It is the practice of washing the dishes while just washing the dishes. It is the practice of listening to your friend without rehearsing your answer. It is the practice of feeling the anxiety of a red light without reaching for your phone. And when you do this, when you really do this, something shifts. You stop feeling like a ghost. People start to look at you differently. They trust you more, not because of what you say, but because they feel
the weight of your presence. They feel honored by your attention, because in this economy, true attention is the rarest commodity we have. But the biggest change is internal. You finally get to experience the only thing that is actually yours, your life. Not the memory of it, not the projection of it, the raw, textured, high-definition reality of it. The question is not whether you are capable of this. The biology is already there. The question is whether you are willing to endure the initial discomfort of waking up. Because the choice is happening right now, in this second. Are you here? Or are you already moving to the next video, the next tab, the next dopamine hit? Time doesn't wait for you to be ready. Your children will not stop growing while you finish your emails. Your partner will not wait forever for you to look up. The perfect moment to start paying attention does not exist. There is only this moment. You don't need a sword. You don't need a dojo. You just need to be where your feet are. Now. And now. And now. If this perspective on attention shifted something for you, even a little, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep making content that respects your intelligence. But more importantly, I have a challenge for you. Don't just click away. Pick one anchor right now. Maybe it's your car door. Maybe it's the sensation of your coffee cup. Maybe it's the act of unlocking your phone. Pick one thing that will force you to ask, where am I? Tell me in the comments what your anchor is going to be. Writing it down makes it real. Your life is happening. Don't miss it. Thank you for your time, and thank you for being here, truly here. Until the next video.